So time for our next segment and our second panel of the day. In this panel, we have the pleasure to listen in as our industry experts over here discuss the conundrum that while IoT has been one of the major reasons for advancements in technology, these devices in smart home environments also open up the possibility of security and privacy risks through exploitation by hackers. What are these challenges? What are the numerous ways to overcome these challenges? Here to answer your questions, I'm going to introduce Dr. Eric Luster. He's the president and CEO of Movement Interactive. Dr. Eric Luster, let's give him a warm welcome of applause. Always important to be able to hear the panel as well.
Taking copious notes over here.
Well, thank you all for joining us and staying for the last panel of the day. Again, I'm Dr. Luster, and I actually got started with IoT about 20 years ago. I started off in the United States Army, where I was a nuclear biological chemical specialist. And even back then, they wanted to go ahead and put those sensors on the network so that we could actually identify a chemical attack anywhere in the world and receive that information on our computer. So even back 20 years ago, they were developing and working towards IoT. When I was eventually recruited out of the Army by Northrop Grumman to do the joint interoperability testing for those sensors, I found out something really baffling. I found out that they didn't actually talk to the soldiers who would use the sensors and use the equipment. They just led with the technology. And so I made it a mission over the last 20 years to do something about that. Hence, I developed a company that works on a sensor that detects and reports concussions in real time. And so that's enough about me. I really want to get and get some time with our expert panel here. So let's get started. First, we have Mr. Greg Davis from McAfee.
It's Gary Davis.
Gary Davis.
That's right.
Sorry.
I spelled it wrong.
All right.
Anyways, I'm with McAfee. I would imagine most of you have heard of our company. We're one of the largest cybersecurity companies in the world. And we have been spending a lot of time over the past several years trying to solve the problem for connected things in homes and how we can make those devices safer. You know, right now we're connecting about 4,800 new devices every minute of every day. IDC predicts that by 2025, we'll be connecting 158,000 devices every minute of every day. Most of these devices are being built with little to no thought about security. They're solving for time to market and convenience. And because of that, they're going into environments, be it a home environment or work environment, and exposing those environments to threats and cybercrime. So we'll be talking a little bit about that, but that's what I'm up here to chat about a little bit.
Excellent. Next, we have Gaston Hiller from GeoPortal.io.
Well, I've been working with computers for a long time, and we've developed allocation intelligence cloud-native solution that integrates with many sensors, IoT devices, and we build bridges with lots of platforms. So security is a very important thing in our platforms. I'm always trying to stay with all the security threats that are over there on the CPUs, all the problems with the platforms, so that our solution is secure and with all the bridges with the IoT devices also complying with the latest security requirements.
Excellent. Next, we have Wiley Wade from Biometrica.
So I sit on the advisory council for the largest multiple listing service in the world, so lots of buying and selling of houses. The other half of what I do is I sit on the technology advisor of one of the largest IoT companies called Lutron. And yeah, those devices that you're putting in, I know very well at that rate. And I'm glad that everybody keeps putting them in.
Excellent. Next, we have David Biga from Particle Space.
Biga.
Biga.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Particle Space is not one of the largest companies in security. So Particle Space is a property and building management platform. So essentially, we're the ones who are connecting to the sensors in your homes or your buildings, right? To pull back information, to provide insight, such as critical events like flood, fire, that is going on within the building, to make it useful for property managers, facility managers to easily have more of a aspect of control of their property. So when it comes to security over, how these devices are being accessed, that is a crucial aspect, especially since we're cloud-based, right? So we have to make sure connections are secure and work through different protocols like that.
Excellent. So we will get into our first question, and this is a question that impacts everyone in the room, especially when we talk about smart home environments and security and privacy as it relates to IoT devices. Wanted to ask the panel, what are you doing, or what is your company doing to protect against the humans that are in the loop here when we're dealing with IoT devices?
Should I start? Is that kind of in my wheelhouse? Actually, and it's a very common availability today for somebody put either bits on the router or in an adjacent device to the router in the home, because most all the traffic going in and out of the home is going to be going through that router in some capacity. So if you look at the security space today, most of your major players have come up with some technology which allows for consumers to safeguard those devices that sit behind that router. Now, that's not to say that issues can't come up. For example, most of these devices solve for what's called north-south traffic. As long as the traffic's going over the router, you can understand whether or not it's good traffic or bad traffic, whether a device is talking with a server it shouldn't, and things like that. But what happens when you have east-west traffic? Right, let's say somebody comes in through your smartphone, they connect to your router, all of a sudden you have east-west traffic and you're unable to look at that and understand what's going on. So there are still some challenges in this space as far as how you can most effectively deal with the threats to your connected things in your home. But suffice it to say that most consumers today, when they put these devices in the home, they're doing very little to lock those down. In fact, just quickly, anecdotally, we went out and purchased a commercial DVR. We brought it into our lab, we turned it on, and connected to the internet and waited. And within 64 seconds, that device was crawled, authenticated, and malware was installed. 64 seconds from the time you turn it on to the time it's an infected device. So when these consumers bring these devices in their homes, they're doing the same thing. They're not thinking about, how do I safeguard this device? They're thinking, how do I get this TV to provide a service? How do I get this device to do what I need it to do? They aren't thinking really about, what can I do to make sure the first order of business is to minimize the risk of that device being in my home.
Yeah, so I think, there's an aspect of consumer being responsible for safeguarding devices that are running within, behind the router, their home, right? And then there's the aspect of a service who's talking to these devices, IoT systems that making sure when we're talking to them, we are authenticated. But to the point of helping, with safeguarding hackers from attacking these IoT devices for consumers who, they're not going to care, right? They want to plug and have a solution. That's what we want. Instant functionality. Exactly. And one and this is where you're seeing Google, Amazon, these huge players purchase these IoT companies, right? Google purchasing Nest. And it's, at the end of the day, there's a standard that's being created that's going through Google's devices, right? And you could trust that they're probably going to have a better security protocol and a more thought out process. And I would say it is safer when you standardize the communication for how things are calling through. But at the same time, that raises a lot of risk for just a consumer. What information from me is being used then? And then if you have a data breach, right? Facebook all the time has issues we find out about. And, that data gets stolen.
So who has a Nest? Anybody in the crowd? All right. Does anybody even know who Lutron is? And do you have a Lutron switch? Oh, actually, that's great. So be it Leviton or Lutron or Nest, there's over 1 million lines of code in that device. That device communicates more often inside the house than it does external to the house. So you have to start asking yourself also, how are those devices being connected? And then what is the company doing? And yes, Google's starting to standardize, but they also have had a couple really huge security breaches inside of the house as well. And Amazon the same way with the Amazon Ring doorbell, which they bought. You've had a lot of security breaches around that. So standardization, while is good, there's also the opportunity that standardization just makes it that one loophole is exploitable across so many other devices. So, it's not just, if I'm going to attack you, I'm not going to come in through your router. I'm going to come in through the human. I'm going to get to your device because your device is a lot easier than getting in through the router. That security is much better than a malware or an email that I sent to you to install some malware.
Well, we are living in very rough times. A few weeks ago, one of the recommendations was to disable one of the features that made CPUs around 20 to 40% have better performance. Disable hyper-threading because there is a leak. That happened a few weeks ago. So how do we live with all these kinds of things, all these news about all these privacy problems, all these leaks? We have to educate, number one. We have to understand which are all the devices that we have and educate consumers. And whenever we develop platforms, we have to take care of security as a number one issue and then the futures. Because a long time ago, it was all about getting the best performance for any device. And then leaks started to appear that attacked privacy. So the recommendation was let's apply patches that made everything run slower. So it was easier to think about security first and have the real performance with security in mind than putting patches that make all our devices slower. Our computers this year, with all the patches applied, are around 30% slower if we take the same computer 3 years ago. That's because we're adding patches, security patches. So what we thought when we started developing our GeoPortal platform, we said, we don't have to use legacy code at all, and we have to build from scratch with security as the first thing, then the features. And of course, we missed a lot of features, but at least we work with security in mind as something extremely important. And I think that's the only way to make sure that we comply to all the privacy things and all the regulations is to think security first, then the futures. Because we've been thinking in the software development industry and in the development of consumer hardware, first was let's have for 4K TV. No, let's have security. Then let's have a 4K resolution. So it's a different way of thinking, but if we make the paradigm shift, we will start developing solutions that have another point of view. It's difficult because you always have time to market, to lower costs, and so on, but it's better to have security first than losing all your customers you earn in 6 months because you have leaks in their devices that running at home or the devices that are being collected by the platform, and you see that privacy has been leaked.
But part of that actually is a derivative of the way our education system has built computer science and people who program. There is not a single university in the United States that actually requires a secure computing class to graduate with a computer science degree. So that's part of the problem, is that you're developing engineers, you're developing computer science people that do not have any idea what secure computing really is.
In fact, one of the biggest problems when you start working with platforms and applications that interact with home devices is that you ask software engineers, how are you going to treat the password? And they use techniques that worked okay 25 years ago, but nowadays they are useless. So there is a problem. So if you don't have a paradigm shift of saying security is my rule number one, then all the other things, you're definitely going to produce something that's going to have leaks everywhere. So that's the main paradigm shift, and of course there is a need for a change in the education in the IT industry to consider that.
Yeah, and I am one of those software engineers. So,
Me too.
so I totally relate. This concept called agile development, right? You're trying to push things, code out really quickly. And a lot of that comes back to consumer, instant gratification. People want products. So the last thing people care about, honestly, is security most. That's the last thing you think about, and I think part of that is because of that, and that does go down. Even from, I will admit, there's been a lot of times when I'm developing systems, right, you find out about security flaws after it's developed. And that's just part. Always. It's just part of it, but it's also the mindset. You're just not thinking because you want to push it out, right? You got to get the product out there. You got to go to market. Otherwise, someone else is going to do it. So there's a balance, but I personally do not think it will be solved. I think that the security flaws will always exist, just as we discover more things. I think that's part of a way of showing that we are advancing in our innovation and our techniques and our design patterns and things, because we're finding flaws and stuff like that.
And there is one important thing related to what you've been saying. Processing power increases. I'm not talking about single core processing power. I don't want to be too technical, but the capability of processing more things at the same time increases every year. So hackers have more powerful capabilities to attack things that we thought that were super secure. So if we consider security as something continuous, a constant over time, we will realize it's everything that needs to be considered every single day in our development life cycle. That's the paradigm shift, because as you mentioned, new leaks are found, and if you have security in mind, you are going to be continuously testing with security in mind, because testing software doesn't have to be anymore just testing our software or a consumer hardware product. Testing based on features, it must be tested
with rule number one, security, then the filters. So everything changes.
But it also sort of goes back to your point that the more standardization that you get, when I find that big bug, when I find that loophole, I can exploit it, and there's a lot less that you have an ability to do. And there's a great line in security called "there's security through obscurity," right? And that's really what has saved our electrical grid, is that process. Unlike in South America over the last couple of weeks, where 2/3 of their entire electrical grid was shut down because they all bought Honeywell stuff. I mean, and there was a bug in it, and they've now exploited it, and now they're trying to turn power back on.
Yeah, so that's a great segue to talk about privacy. We've talked a lot about security, but when it comes to privacy, how safe is our information as consumers, as users?
I'll kick it off if that's okay. We all love free stuff, right? We just do. It's the nature of who we are, right? Imagine if you had to pay Google every time you did a search, or pay Facebook every time you had to, chat with a friend. I mean, we enjoy free, right? But in today's society, data is currency, right? For example, even in our space, the security space, the value of your personal data is worth 10 times that of a breached credit card. Think about that. And you may ask, well, why is it so valuable? It's because the data is very difficult, if not impossible, to change. You can't change your date of birth. You may want to change your mother's maiden name, but you can't. Your address you can change, but you have to move. Good luck changing your social security number. So these data elements that exist about you are highly valuable. And oh, by the way, they exist in an environment where they don't have to be exercised day one. A bad actor can leverage that data when they think they'll get the most benefit from it. But then you look at that shift from the idea that we like free stuff and we understand the value of data to the notion of privacy as we know it today. It continues to be this thing that's taken flight. Now, there has been some meaningful legislation, the GDPR in Europe. There's now a California privacy law, and there's one being passed in New York, which are almost as rigid as GDPR is. But privacy as a quantity. As a matter of fact, I think it was Mary Meeker, who's a very well-known internet analyst, recently went on record to say that privacy is the #1 concern of the internet right now. And at the end of the day, if we as consumers don't understand what data we're giving up and how that data is being used, it's not going to get any better. And I have literally tons of data that talks about everything from the cost of privacy and the impact if you're breached, to consumer sentiment about their desire to engage with you if they think their private information is going to be stolen. And just leave you with a data point: 74% of all consumers have stopped interacting with you online because they're concerned about the privacy. 74%. So all that money you're spending on your website, your marketing campaigns, your search engine marketing, all those things are being, in essence, just thrown away because you haven't done enough to convince that consumer that you're going to take proper care of their private information.
Wow, that's a great point, Gary. Question that I have for anyone on the panel here is when it comes to video and these consumers and their privacy, we heard from other panels that video has the privacy issues, we have the latency issues, but you still see tons of video cameras going into homes. What do you guys say about that when it comes to privacy?
Well, I think we often confuse security for privacy. Just because you have security does not necessarily mean you have privacy, and neither on the other side. How many camera devices are sitting in this room right now, not including the devices that you have in your hand? And just because you spent $1,000 on this device did not mean that you actually paid for it. Remember, it's subsidized by all that other stuff that goes on in that device. Those cameras are constantly recording you. In any given casino in Las Vegas, you're going to have somewhere between 4,000 and 8,000 cameras that are videotaping everything. that shows my age, videotaping, and are constantly running it. So you don't truly have privacy. So I lived in India for 5 years, and one of the things that was sort of beaten into me was that privacy is a first world country problem. And it's because you associate privacy with identity. And those are two very vastly different things. Your privacy does not include your identity. Instead, we need to figure out better ways to improve our identity management and not care that much about privacy because we're never going to get rid of it. I mean, your data, there are so many exemptions in GDPR that your data is really never going to go away. Google's never going to delete all that data.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I mean, if it goes away, where do we get these new products from, right? Half of these products wouldn't even exist if your data went away. So, there's a question that has to be asked: is what data information that's being collected on me worth it for the long run of the product that will serve me better in the future? So I think that's to be balanced.
So I did an example of this at one point. It's technically, because of HIPAA, it's technically illegal for CVS to sell your prescription data that Wiley got, Allegra at this particular time. But it's not illegal for CVS to sell anonymized data of that individual, and it's not illegal for Verizon to then sell you my location data. And so because I know that I was standing at that location at that particular time, now I can marry all that data back up. And that has a lot of value to a lot of people.
My next question switches gears a bit and discusses the platforms that are built for accessing this data on the IoT devices. I want to talk about some of the challenges around building the platforms.
You mean the cloud platforms?
Yes.
Yeah, where it goes in the cloud?
Yes.
Well, again, there's a whole plethora of challenges when you look at cloud-based security in particular. One is, if you look at, I think it was HP did some research, and they found that on average, the top 10 devices deployed in the home had 25 vulnerabilities each. And a lot of that had to do with vulnerabilities associated with the cloud. There was no encrypted communications. There was no requirement to change your authentication. There are several factors that just dismiss this notion of privacy, of the platform's ability to provide you any sort of meaningful security controls or privacy, just because the company that was leveraging or creating that platform really didn't have a notion of how to make it in the most secure, private-centric way. So that every platform device, you think about the home, I have 37 different connected devices in my homes. I have Alexa devices. I have Google Home or the Google Assistant devices. I have Ring doorbells, Nest thermostats, digital cameras. All these talk to a different platform, and each of those platforms has a very different set of security controls, most of which are at some point going to be compromised. It's just the nature of the beast.
One of the biggest issues we found when integrating different platforms was the problem of the culture of grabbing some open source piece of code around there and make some changes to make it work. Well, I have nothing against open source. Please do not misunderstand my comment. What I'm saying is open source or code available everywhere. Perhaps I used the wrong word. I mean, if you just grab code and then make changes to make it work with your platform, then you are importing all the security and privacy problems of those pieces of code if you don't really test it. Sometimes it is better to, I'm not saying you have to reinvent the wheel all the time, but sometimes it's cool if you have some guidelines, if you have a software development process, if you have an integration process, to take some time to analyze as
company culture, code, and not just grab pieces of code and then put in them and it works. Awesome, we did it. The future is there. So we can encode video to the new format of encoding mechanism we needed. We use this, and you don't pay attention to which pieces you are putting into your platform. You will have problems. There's no other. I mean, you have to be extremely lucky, which is more convenient to use your luck with the chatbots and instead of just putting any piece of code you don't know. That's been a problem, and one of the biggest problems with that was OpenSSL. The OpenSSL problem that everybody uses, great, OpenSSL, let's use it. And they didn't realize that the maintenance was being just too little for all the new threats. And then, big exploit with OpenSSL and all the things that we know that happened and at that time, and then the patches. So it's very important to consider when you are developing the platforms, you have to take care of what you're doing and have a process. At least, I mean, you're going to have leaks. I'm not saying that, as you mentioned, and it's obvious that you always will have an issue. However, to minimize it and not to import issues from other pieces that you grab and then you make filters without taking care.
And one of the things that IoT is really starting to struggle with is that if you look back there, you have light switches, right? You have electrical outlets all over here. When was the last time that a facility manager came along and said, hey, I need to update my light switch or my electric outlet, or even at your home? When was the last time, outside of recently, you bought a new Nest or a connected device? Nobody does those things, right? So you have to build a product, and then you have to support that product and maintain the back end of that product for 40 plus years. That's the average lifespan of a light switch inside of a building. So how do you do that when you're talking about something that moves so fast?
Excellent. Yeah, so for the panel here, what techniques and tools are being used for these devices that we bring home and we install these intelligent agents in our home? Can you tell us about some of those techniques and tools they're using to attack us and what we can do as consumers, business owners?
Well, I can see there are several variants of malware targeting connected things. The two main strains are one's called Mirai, the other is called Reaper. Mirai, and they're different characteristics. Mirai basically uses brute force techniques in order to use a number of credential sets to try to access the device. So basically, if it finds a default username and password, you get access in your end. Reaper, on the other hand, looks at known exploits, known vulnerabilities in connected things, and then launches exploit at those vulnerabilities to see if they can get in. Both of them have gotten very, very popular. In fact, Mirai took down about 25% of the eastern seaboard a couple years ago. And there are forecasts that suggest that Reaper is now large enough to take down the entire internet. So these malware strains that are being ubiquitous on connected things, and most consumers and companies don't know how to scan for them and correct them if they're in their environments. If they ever wake them up and decide to do a distributed denial of service attack using a botnet or something like that, it could have near catastrophic consequences.
So one of the most interesting malware attacks / distributed denial of service attacks actually came out of a Coca-Cola machine. They had attacked a whole bunch of Coca-Cola machines, flipped them all on at the same time, and then all of a sudden, Sears, JCPenney's, and Costco couldn't actually sell a single product. So, and if they can't keep up with it, dude, we're all screwed. I mean, and that's really, I don't mean to be that sort of doom and gloom, but some of it really is that bad. I mean, you need to go home and update your computer today, by the way. And you need to, if you own a vertical building, which you spend a lot of time in, right? So update the facility manager needs to be updating those computers and all the devices inside of them as frequently as possible, and they never do.
Oh, I'm going to get to questions and answers. I have one more question for the panel here, and this is for every member of the panel. I wanted to know what your outlook is for the challenges in privacy and security as it's related to IoT devices over the next 5 years.
Wow, that's a big one. Well, you just have to look as far as companies like Facebook and some of the privacy challenges they've taken on over these past couple of years. Privacy, again, it's hard to put privacy and security in the same spotlight when it comes to challenges over the next 5 years because they have very different trajectories. With security, you're thinking about, are they vulnerable? Are they exploitable? What kind of attack techniques can be used en masse to target devices? That's a very different challenge than how you're going to deal with a privacy challenge. A privacy challenge, part of it is educating consumers, understanding what is an appropriate amount of information that should and could be shared in order to get value from a service, versus the privacy issues associated with how companies are misusing your private information to help monetize your companies. And that happens a lot more than you think. We mentioned a little bit about some companies have the ability to anonymize data and use that to monetize, but more companies than you think are leveraging that data they collect about you and these various services that are provided by these connected things in order to come up with other features and capabilities that will target you as consumers. So don't assume if you have, in my instance, 37 different connected things and they're all on different platforms, that there's not a massive consolidation going on that would allow those devices to work in concert to provide specific information about me as a consumer and target me with either some sort of phishing attack, social engineering attack, or something of that nature.
Yeah, and the piggy off, my biggest concern would be with the storing of that data and how it's being used, and then the vulnerability of being attacked, right? Because for the most part, sensors, door sensors, it's all, door open, door closed, right? Low voltage. And it's not giving much information, but when you gather it, and you build, you accumulate that, and you are able to predict something, tell something about the consumer, that becomes then personal, and how is that information being stored? So this is where the cloud companies come into play, like Google, right? Google is making an effort to, purchase a lot of these IoT companies and centralize everything through their system. Well, Google has an email associated with every single one of you, and they know how many times you leave your home, all that. So it just takes, the standard, right? Takes that one vulnerability to get access to everything about you. And this is some of the interesting piggyback into blockchain, right? And kind of how you can use that for security measures, which completely different topic, but piggyback off that, yeah.
Well, and I think the further that we get down to this path where you talk about automation, where you talk about convenience, as long as you have this device in your pocket, you have no privacy. Just accept it. I mean, it's done. If you have a Nest thermostat in your house, there's an IR sensor in there. They know every member of your house, and they don't know it as my name is Wiley, but they know that I am 5'10", 220 pounds, because my thermal sensor is different than my wife's or my daughter's or our dog's. So you have no true privacy anymore. Like I said, that is a first world concept, and we have to sort of get away from it, because the reality is we gave it up a long, long time ago. The other side of it is that how many cameras do you see on every street corner, on every place that you go? I can take a picture of everybody in here, and I can have your background scanned within literally seconds. And you basically authorize that because you're in a public place. So you don't have privacy. Security, on the other hand, we have a right to security. We have a right to be able to trust that the understanding of how our data is going to be used and who it's going to be used by. This is one of the things that Apple has done a phenomenal job at doing. I mean, standing up to the FBI and basically saying, no, we will not give you the keys to be able to unencrypt those phones. Now, however else they got them, that's a different story. But they've made it their mission to be willing to sacrifice things for their company, including huge governmental contracts, because they want to protect the consumer's security, and that's noble.
Obviously, what you mentioned, that you could easily get all the backgrounds in seconds, is what I take as a phrase for what I think it's for the next years. Processing power is going to increase, and data is the main raw material. In this conference, we've been talking about in the morning about machine learning, deep learning, and it's raw material, real data about the users for all these processes too. So not only we have all the threats, but also we have that our behavior at home is a great raw material for a lot of deep learning, machine learning algorithms. So I think what's going to happen, we will have devices that we won't be able to trust because they are going to be, they won't care about security and privacy. And as you mentioned, there is one phone that said, I won't unlock the phone, I won't give you the keys, and well, in some way there are devices that you're going to think like this phone brand that you say, okay, these people take care of my privacy, or something like happened with Facebook then, with all the leaks on all the data. Many people say, I won't use Facebook anymore. So as time goes by, consumers are going to select which are the products. In the middle, we will lose some battles with privacy and security. That's a big issue. But I think that the way of thinking that have, the way of working of the IT industry and the way IoT devices were developed, like, I mean, devices that were launched, and when you change the switch from on to off, it continue listening. I mean, that's a failure that, I mean, it's impossible to, quality assurance should have detected that issue. I mean, those kinds of things, and I think that it's going to be more mature, the IoT market, and we're going to see a more conscious consumer that's going to take into account this in the selection of products, which are the ones that are really providing me more privacy and security, and that's going to change the rules. I think that that's going to happen, and with the platforms too, the same story.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. Now we're going to take questions from the audience.
Well, I just think it's hard to imagine what you'll have 10 years from now, because some of the stuff we had today were probably not imagined 10 years ago. But having said that, how much of a responsibility is it of the companies themselves? Because we've talked a lot about consumers having to know what to do, or consumers having to put in place stuff for their own security in their homes. They should change passwords, they should go home and update their computers, they should do a whole bunch of stuff. But what about the companies? How much of a responsibility is it on the part of your organizations to do stuff? For instance, there was a story today about coffee makers, how a white hat hacker used a coffee maker as a gateway to then hack into a whole bunch of other devices because of the Wi-Fi password being public, and then using that to hack into the home's other smart hub devices. And
I think that was our company, by the way.
Pardon?
That was our company. We talked about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. Coffee, the Wemo switch. Yeah.
So, I mean, that, for instance, or 60+% of Americans have more than one device. A whole bunch of other people use devices, smart devices, in their homes. Now, if there are, and the second question related to this is if there are curbs put on companies, how much of that will curb innovation? If companies have to go through a more stringent process to before they can release products, because they have to put in, say, consumer education or put in something to ensure that they provide support for consumers, to ensure privacy or to ensure that they are not hacked at the consumer level or as much as they can do, because it will stimulate, say, convenience for the consumer, how much of that will push back innovation?
I actually don't think it's going to be, if we do this well, and not that we're doing it well today, but let's say we get on a different path, I think this problem will fix itself. Because what happens in time is these companies that are notorious for being vulnerable and being targeted in these broad-ranging attacks, consumers will stop buying them. In fact, one of the things that the ecosystem has been considering is coming up with almost like an Energy Star rating for connected things. And imagine, when you go in to buy a connected device, you see two smart switches. They're both, $50. One smart switch is, quote, Energy Star rated, so it's been through all these security tests. The other one hasn't. You're probably going to be more inclined to buy that one that has gone through that rating system. So again, stepping back to your first question, it is a shared responsibility and always will be. I agree absolutely that the company should be responsible for regularly patching these devices, coming up with the ways to make them safer as they realize these vulnerabilities. But consumers need to continue to be educated and informed. You just can't, when a consumer is using a password like 123456, you could have the best security controls in the world, but it's going to be too easy to crack that password. So we need a better informed and educated consumer. We need businesses that make these devices to take this serious and make sure they're building devices that have security built in by design. And then lastly, we need the security ecosystem to continue to innovate here. Right? Like I said earlier, all the big security companies have built a device that goes in the home, either on the existing router or adjacent to the router, which will allow for a lot of this detection and security to be put in place without the consumer having to do a lot of things. I think it's a shared responsibility by those three groups in varying degrees in order to make it work. But it's always going to be a challenge, for sure.
So really quick, can someone speak to usability and as a company how we can increase security, but it has a negative impact on usability? For example, those video cameras that you buy out of the store, what if it came with a 3-page instruction manual on securing it?
I don't think that's true. I really don't think you have to forego usability to enable security. Now, I do think security has to evolve. And for example, one of our bigger partners is Telefonica. It's a massive international telco or operator, and they have taken the stance we're going to have security on by design, right? Every device in your home, every router, every smartphone, every endpoint device is going to have security turned on, and then you as a consumer have to go turn it off if you don't want it. There are things we can be doing which won't affect the usability of devices to make them more secure. And I think that, again, if you build it in, if you build security in from the very onset of building a new connected thing, you can make it so it's not going to be onerous and difficult for the consumer. Because I agree, convenience is a major factor for driving adoption. And if it's too difficult to set up, consumers aren't going to buy it.
But I think on the other side of that too, you can't, as a consumer, you can't abdicate your responsibility. When your engine light comes on in your car, if you don't take it to the dealership soon, it's going to die, and who pays that bill? That's your own responsibility. The other side of that is that, remember, a lot of these devices are expected to live in that wall for 40 plus years. So it's going to take a long time. And that company, most likely all the IoT companies that exist today, will not exist at the next time that device has to be replaced. I mean, the only ones that have really existed for 40 plus years, Honeywell, GE, and Lutron. So, and none of them are any of the things that are probably sitting on your panel for that kind of stuff. So, I mean, it's one of those things. It's going to be hard to, and most of those grew out of building appliances. And really, has there been an innovation in a dishwasher in the last 40 years? I mean, maybe. Maybe it washes my dishes a little better.
I think there is one example I want to add from the real life, from the responsibility between the consumer and the company. Whenever you buy a car, you take care of checking whether it has security issues. And if you see that there were a lot of accidents with that car, you usually say, no, I skip this one because there have been like 20 accidents and they discover they have failures in this, that. And most of the times, you buy a more expensive car because it has great security ratings. So why are not doing the same with IoT devices? The common sense tells us that we are going to do it more and more and more. In fact, I'll tell you, for example, I usually bought a certain CPU brand, but after many security vulnerabilities, I decided to switch to the other side because I had to apply patches, 40% slower, 50% slower. So, okay, solve all your patches, and when you produce a more secure product, I'll be a consumer of your products again. So there is a penalty for not considering security, and that's going to happen too for any IoT device on any platform. There's a penalty. It takes time, but consumers have a responsibility, because if you continue buying the product, for example, another simple example, if you buy some clothes and they burn your skin, are you going to buy again that brand? No, you're not going to do it. So it's going to happen sooner or later. So we are like in an inflection point where things are going to change, I think. Of course, if there is a password stored without any kind of encryption or security, and any developer in the company can access it, obviously it's the company responsibility. So there are cases where obviously there is also a need for a change in a paradigm shift.
Yeah, and if I could add that, it has to be a shared responsibility. And the reason it has to be is if the user becomes vulnerable, well, that can affect my system. So me, being a cloud-based platform that's communicating with sensors, we don't create hardware. We talk to any sort of IoT system that can send us out some sort of signal. We have to protect ourselves as well to make sure that that data coming to us is from a verified source, right? And so if we don't put those things in place from the consumer's end, well, we're at risk, right? And then that means our data is at risk. And so it has to flow both ways.
Great, thank you guys. This concludes the panel for IoT. Thanks, guys.